in the World Wrestling Federation, the Macho Man is running around wearing a crown now. Curt Hennig has an absolutely perfect record. A huge man in a sailor outfit who would soon shock the world is running around his tugboat. Seeds are being planted for Hulk Hogan to face the ultimate challenge, but in WCW. A copious amount of Pepsi is being consumed. A little bit of acid indigestion. What was the diagnosis again?
It was extreme acid reflux, and when I quit the booking committee, I got off my prescription Zantac.
He needs no introduction. He was on camera. He was creative. And we're going to have some fun tackling 1990. Let's jump right in. On January 6th...
Wait a minute, he needs no introduction, so you don't give me one.
Absolutely not.
I'm Jim Cornette. Hi, how are you?
Absolutely.
Who are you again?
Fuck, man, if they bought it, they know. Who the hell pays $25 for a DVD today?
By the way, unlike other people who just make this shit up out of their memory, I've got all the documentation, we got the paperwork, we got the contemporaneous notes. I was James Comey before Comey was cool. And of course, you can't get this anymore. Try it on eBay if you're lucky.
Now, if you have the 1989 edition and also the WWE timeline from 1997, you know that these are the authentic articles here. We have formats, we have payoffs, we have the road schedule here in the date book. And before we went on, I said to Jim, you're so fastidious with this. Were you fearing a lawsuit someday? What was it? And your answer was?
Anal retentive and obsessive compulsive, and I always needed to know these things. And plus I paid $36 for the motel that night in Atlanta. The boys got a rate because it was an income tax, because I always paid mine, unlike a lot of the other boys. And I have every book since 1983, et cetera, et cetera.
For your edification.
For your edification, enlightenment, and entertainment.
One of these guys who just show up, disappear, and never be heard from again, right?
Never.
Tell me the circumstances of his coming into the company.
I called Dutch Mantell. I said, "You got a 7-foot guy?" He said, "Yeah, I got." Well, no, seriously, because we had the skyscrapers, right? Spivey and Sid, and which one got hurt then? Who did Mark replace? Was it Mark replaced Sid? Because Sid was hurt that time.
Yes.
And so we had no skyscrapers, and I, of course, got all the territory tapes. I was the only one that was actually watching the other wrestling programs. And the Master of Pain, Under the Mask, was in Memphis, USWA at the time, and Dutch was over there. And I called Dutch. I said, "Who's the big guy, and is he any good?" And he said, "Yeah." He said, "He's green, but he's a great kid. He's going to be great. He's got a wonderful attitude. He listens." I said, "Can we have him?" He said, "Fuck to make that much money." He said, Dutch had the famous line one time when Jerry Jarrett said, "Boys, don't be on those steroids. We're going to work with Vince." And Dutch said, "Hell, Jerry, the way you're paying us, we can't afford to be on food." So, Dutch's word was good enough for me, and we brought him over, and Terry Funk named him because Mark Calloway, And we were thinking, what can we call him? And Terry Funk said, "What about Mark Callous? Like he's callous and cruel, and it's okay." Works for us, and so at least we had one skyscraper that would fucking listen.
Remember what happened with Sid?
Not that particular time, honestly. No, Sid, there was always an injury or something was hurt, or it was softball season, or whatever the case. But. Ric Flair wanted to work with Bobby Eaton. He'd never had a singles match with Bobby. And he specifically, because Flair was the booker at that time, I guess we should preface this by saying that Ric Flair had demanded the book the previous August or September of '89 because things were in such dire straits. And that's when he asked me to be on the committee along with Kevin Sullivan. And the people that were on the committee that were already there and we couldn't really do anything about was obviously Jim Herd. Barnett was on it. Jody Hamilton sat in on the meetings. Not knocking Jody, but he's primarily he got the rings places and booked the job guys and everybody. And plus he was a wrestling legend in the Atlanta area. So, and then there were some other rotating members at Jim Ross, because he was working in the office. He was always in the meetings. And then when Herd retired Terry Funk after the I Quit match in New York the previous November on the Clash, he retired Terry without asking him if he wanted to retire first. And so they put Terry on the committee, and we'll talk about the committee dynamics here shortly. But anyway, Rick wanted to work with Bobby Eaton, and we wanted to put it on the main event. So we did the first match, and Rick didn't want to beat Bobby, so we did a DQ. Well, when we did the DQ, Herd went ballistic because how did Bobby Eaton get a world title match? What, he drop in out of a helicopter and Ric Flair can't even beat Bobby Eaton? And he just made such a goddamn stink about it that Rick said, okay. He said, we're going to have another one. And this time I did the finish. I said, okay. In this match, Rick and Bobby had another great match. And then Stan tried to interfere, and Rick foiled Stan's interference, threw him out of the ring, jerked me in the ring, grabbed my racket, knocked me out the ring with my own racket, then beat Bobby 1, 2, 3 in the middle of the ring and stood with his hand up in the air with all three of us laying out there. And I said, okay, let the fucking bastard bitch about that. And he did, of course, because we covered in the previous volume, Buy It, that he didn't like the Midnight Express, he didn't want to use them, he didn't like me, blah, blah, blah. But here's the problem. The problem is that the first Sunday night main event on TBS on December 3rd with Ric Flair versus Bobby Eaton did a great rating. And the second match that aired on January 7th did a 3.2 rating and a 5.0 share. That was 1,667,000 homes. I have the official TBS printout, by the way, here, which was the highest rated Sunday night TBS main event show since, you guessed it, the December 3rd show, were the first Flair and Eaton match. So he was doing these numbers, and the fucking bastard couldn't get over it and wouldn't stop bitching.
But does no one say to him?
Yeah, I did all the time. That's why he didn't like me. Sort of like when everybody tells Trump, you're a fucking lying sack of shit, that he is. And, you know, he doesn't like it because truth hurts.
Why was the decision made to go from Muta to Arn?
Well, there was just no particular reason otherwise than try to get some heat on the heels, I'm sorry, not heat on the heel, but at that time Arn was a babyface, try to get some heat on the Horsemen, because as you will recall from 1989, you got to package these things. So if they don't have 89, they can buy the set. Herd had fucked the Horsemen. Flair had made the arrangement for Arn and Tully to come back to WCW from the WWF, and they had agreed to for $250,000 a year apiece. And then on the way out, when they were finishing up, Tully flunked the drug test,
right?
Because he didn't give a shit. So when Herd heard about that, he rescinded the offer to Tully. So Tully had quit his job in the WWF. And on Ric Flair's say-so, because he had Herd's word that he could offer these guys this money, and then Herd pulled that back, so that effectively ended Tully's Major League Wrestling career because he'd quit on Vince and couldn't go to WCW. And since Herd said that Tully and Arn were more valuable as a team than individuals, he dropped Arn's offer to $150,000.
Yeah, I remember.
So all of a sudden, Arn left a job where he was making really good money to come back for a job that he's now making $100,000 a year less at. And that pretty much effectively ended, for at least the next couple of years, anybody coming from the WWF to WCW, because now they had established that Herd's word and the word of the people in Atlanta was no good.
Where do you place Arn in the lineage of NWA TV champs?
Arn Anderson is one of the greatest talents that ever worked anywhere. I think he probably gave more prestige to the TV championship than the TV championship gave to Arn. It was something that we had. So we were trying to, at least it was still, that hurt was still fresh, that we couldn't put the Horsemen back together, which we all thought would be somewhat of a difference maker. So we're trying at least to give as much credibility to Arn as we could, because we needed to build up some stars. We needed some stars, and they were not only one of the greatest tag teams in the history of wrestling, but also they had drawn some of the biggest houses that Crockett had ever drawn. They had drawn some of the biggest ratings that TBS Wrestling had ever drawn, and we got the chance to get them. And as a matter of fact, that was would have been wonderful to have, not only were we able to have the Rock and Roll Midnight revived again, but also we would have had the Rock and Roll versus the Horsemen revived again. And as you will see here shortly, the Rock and Roll made a tremendous difference coming back fresh after, however long they've been gone. They made a big difference in the ratings. And I mean, at that point, nothing was going to make a difference in the house show numbers.
Well, that's what I was going to ask. Was the luster still there for a Rock and Roll Express in 90, or had some of the popularity waned? I mean, you got the numbers to prove it, so I guess.
Wait till we get to February.
All right.
In February, on February 3rd.
Oh, wait a minute. Don't jump ahead that quick, because we got to do a few things here. For example, wait a minute now. Let's see. Hold on. January 16th, Atlanta, TBS Television, the taping was canceled because we all showed up to Center Stage in Atlanta to do the national television Saturday night TBS show, and the idiot named Don Glass that Herd had hired away from the WWF. See, Don Glass worked in the event booking department, and he was a stooge coffee boy for Ed Cohen, who was the genius who booked all the tours and the buildings and had all the relationships with the major arenas. Well, this Don Glass worked in the department, so Herd hired him away thinking, well, we got all these buildings, right? Well, he was the fucking coffee boy. So one of the things that he booked was this Center Stage taping on January 16th. We got
no
there.
Chairs.
Center Stage was in the middle of renovations. They had concrete ledges. There were no seats in the building and concrete dust all over. And they actually thought for a second about letting the fans in and letting them sit in the dust on the ledges. And then finally they said, no, let's just, we'll do the taping tomorrow.
You're the ringside manager, of course, for the Midnight Express. You got your own talk segment, Louisville Slugger. You're part of the booking committee. You got more jobs than a Jamaican at this point. You're clearly the hardest working man in all of WCW.
Well, I tried.
As they add responsibility, do they have to pay you more?
The only thing I got paid extra for was when I joined the booking committee. I got an extra $300 a week. Otherwise, but that was not unusual. Even before the guaranteed contracts, if you worked there, if you were on the roster, and they said, okay, Sean, you're working a third match, but then on the second show, go out and do the color or whatever. That's what you did. We didn't fucking bitch and whine and have goddamn agents negotiating contracts. Well, if he's going to do announcing, he needs to get another $100,000 a year. No, it was more exposure. It got me out there to do my shit, talk about the Midnight Express, or since I was on the booking committee, at least I could get the angles over from the heel perspective, and plus I'm working with Jim Ross. So
I was going to say, how was it
job.
working with JR?
He taught me pretty much everything I know about. Actually, I could go out there and be a heel and, just aggravate people, but as far as broadcasting and as far as doing color commentary and analysis and as far as and knowing how to read copy and jump in and jump out and do the plugs and et cetera and pitches and inflections and everything. I'm sitting there, learning to paint from Rembrandt. So I should have paid him. I wouldn't paid Herd, but I'd paid Jim Ross.
What's the preparation, if there is any, that you have to do for the co-host?
Well, let's see, February 3rd, you said, right?
Yeah.
What, Center Stage, that's January.
It was actually taped on January 31st, so maybe.
Oh, well, that helps out.
It airs on
Center
February 3rd.
Stage, good Lord, I should color code these things. Center Stage, January 31st.
He should color code these from 1983.
Well,
He should color code them.
see, first and I was writing. Let me go ahead and explain to you now how we did the formats, and then and you'll be able to B-roll some of this stuff.
Yeah.
We would have booking meetings once a week. We would fly to some fucking place or whatever, Detroit or wherever, that Herd would get together with us while we were all on because me and Flair and Kevin were on the road. Jim Ross was on the road for TVs, but for house shows, he was back at the office. And everybody else, Barnett and all those guys, were in the office. So they would go on the road and we would meet at a airport hotel or get a boardroom or something somewhere. And absolutely nothing of the booking was actually done in the booking meetings. Because Herd would grump and argue and grouse at Rick or at me or at whoever and talk about what he wanted to have done or do or whatever. And then we'd all leave, and then Rick would sit with me and Kevin in the car or on the way to the airport or before the show or whatever and say, okay, I want to work with so-and-so. Sean, you work a program with Anthony. This would be a great angle. We'll do this. Boom, boom, boom. He'd give us the high spots, and some main event matches to put on television that he had in his head. And then he'd tell me and Kevin, okay, go fill it in. Mm-hmm. So then I would sit down, sometimes in a room late at night, or if I ever was home, with the talent roster and all the paperwork, because look how I am, and I would do formats. And I would make sure that everybody was represented in some kind of way and that all the things that we needed to do were involved somehow. And then I'd write them out by hand, and then I would show them to Kevin. And Kevin would say, well, Jimmy, you got a good maintenance show there. I can't do Boston. But it needs a little oomph there, or you need to put this. So he would give me a couple of ways to dress up just a flat job match, or he'd give me a little thing to do where somebody would be involved or whatever that would juice it up a little bit and add a little something to that hour. And he would tell me at the same time why he was doing that, and so he was teaching me. So then I'd go and I'd put that down, and I'd redo the shows, and then I'd send them in by the fax machine to Janie Engel at the office. And she'd type them up, which is then what you see here. Then Herd would see them, and Herd would get mad, and he'd take out all the live interviews, and he'd put in 30-second pre-tapes. Then we'd go, because he didn't like live interviews, because that's the only wrestling show he'd ever seen was the one that he worked on in St. Louis when he was a director in the 60s, and that's one thing Sam Muchnick didn't do was very many interviews. So he didn't think, he thought well, goddamn, we need a good wrestling bout to keep the people's attention. If Ric Flair is doing a live interview in the ring with fucking Woman, and JR's holding the microphone, and Flair's doing his thing, and the fans are going crazy, that's bad. But if we have a wrestling match involving the fucking New Zealand militia, well, that'll keep the fans' attention. So he'd take all the live interviews out and put in 30-second pre-tapes instead. Then we would go to the show, and we'd have the production meeting at the taping, and as Rick would look at the formats, he'd say, is this what we had? And then I'd get out my originals, and I'd say, no, Rick, who changed it? Well, actually, Herd would tell Jim Ross, because he was in the office to change it. That's where JR got on sideways with Flair, because it would be JR changed it. So Rick would have me change it back, and then we'd do what we originally planned most of the time if we caught it, and then Herd would go ballistic again. But anyway, so you got the list of pre-tapes at the start. I would write those out, and they'd be typed out. Then this is the order of live events, and for the show and the date that it ordered, and then this is the format. And the preparation on the right-hand side, here's all the plugs. Tonight, at the Oak City Fairgrounds Coliseum, Buzz Sawyer and Dr. Death. Tomorrow night, Dallas. This Tuesday night, The Clash, Texas Shootout, starting time 8:05 Eastern. This Friday night, Gordon Soley and Jim Ross for the Power Hour, Funk's Grill, the Royal Families, all the bullet points. I would sit down with JR as the color guy, and we'd go through all of that and make sure that we knew what we were wanting to do and wanting to plug. Join us for the Extended Wrestling Hotline coverage of The Clash on 1-900 buy this shit or whatever. And so and then JR and we would sit, and if there was a main event, we would really go into it in a little bit more depth on what we wanted to talk about and how we wanted to get the guys over. But if it was, Keith Hart and Pat Rose versus the Fabulous Freebirds, that was pretty much self-explanatory, and that was the
But you personally, before going in, would you want some tidbit about individuals? Did you do any of that type of stuff?
Well, I mean, if it was somebody
college they graduated from, amateur.
Yeah.
Would you try to get little facts?
Yeah, JR did a lot of that stuff, and he would feed them to me. And see, once again, as the color guy, that was not my job necessarily, especially as a heel color guy. JR was going to really give, especially if it was a babyface, he was going to give a lot of the guy's background, because I was, as a heel, more intent on tearing the babyface down than building him up. But if it was somebody I'd never seen before, I would ask them also a little bit something about him, but I generally knew the background, or at least the background that we wanted to talk about.
When in wrestling did they start dropping the commentary into the matches that were taped without announcers, either not there, or certainly them not doing the commentary?
They started doing it when they figured out how to, because there was never a budget to do something like that. You had to do the commentary. Either that or it was obvious. There was a film that was shot in the arena and then the announcer is in a studio talking over it. Well, and then this happened. But to make it actually appear that it's the announcer is live, that was around this time the WWF and TBS got budgets and decided that they could do that. And
were you doing it here?
No. Well, no, not on the TBS shows.
Okay.
There might have been a time or two, but for the most part, the announcers were always at center stage or wherever we taped the Saturday night TBS show, and they wanted to be, because it's not the same when you do it canned. Although JR and I tried to, eventually in the WWF, we got to where we were pretty good at it, and their studio was so good at sound mixing, Titans. But the TBS people, they couldn't, the sound mixing was, at that point.
How's their taping facilities these days over at WWE, Jim?
It's network quality. I've never said anything bad about their production. Their producer, that's a different story, but not their production.
Did you spend any time with them?
Nope. No? We passed in the hallway.
Passed it like shit. Oh, you did pass
in the hallway. He was talking to somebody, and I walked this way, and he looked at me, and I looked at him. I didn't speak to him. He didn't speak to me, and I never saw him again.
No. Nothing.
No.
All right. Why is the decision made to turn the Horsemen heel again?
Well, it was always going to head in that direction, because we knew that especially if Tully and Arn had come back, the people would be so glad to see them, especially after some of the stuff they had seen the previous year, that they would go crazy and they would cheer them and they'd be baby faces. But then Rick always wanted to be a heel, and Tully and Arn's best use was as heels. And once again, you could have Tully and Arn in the rock and roll, and etc. So it was always going to go that way, but we knew that there was an initial settle-in period, and with Arn, it was the same thing. They were so happy to see him back. And the reason why Ole was back, he was doing a favor because we were short a horseman. Because Ole, he had his money and he had his business, and he didn't give a shit to get back in the wrestling business. But he did it as a favor. So that was the way, because Flair wanted to eventually put the belt on Sting and had promised Sting the belt, and it was going to happen at that pay-per-view at Wrestle War, that this clash was the go-home clash for. Pay-per-view is going to take place in a couple weeks, so that was the big angle for it.
He tears his patella. And
no, ACL.
Okay.
It was so goddamn, the deal was, Sting was trying to climb the cage to get in after the Horsemen had basically what turned into a heel versus heel match with Gary Hart's crew. And the Horsemen, they put the exclamation point on that piece of business and beat Gary's crew. But Sting, they've turned on him previously in the show, and he's going to try to climb the cage and get to him, and security's supposed to hold him back and everything, and that's the way we're going to go off the air, right? Well, we sure went off the air. Doug Dillinger, love him to death, former Charlotte cop, Crockett cameraman that they had hired to be the head of security, grabbed Sting, and he didn't know how to work. Doug wasn't a worker. He really pulls fucking Sting off the cage. Sting drops, tears his fucking ACL. Oh, Jesus Christ. And now what do we do?
That's what I was going to say.
Yeah, exactly.
How fucked are you at this point?
We were fucked.
Yeah.
And what happened basically was that, we knew that it wasn't good that night. I mean, if you're one of the boys, you know what it's like to, you know what it looks like, you know what it feels like, this guy ain't going to be able to go in 2 weeks. So Flair told me, and Kevin said, well, because I was going to drive on the next night to where the fuck were we? In someplace in Texas, to Beaumont. I was going to drive on that night, and he said, stay over, fly the next morning. Loved that. He said, we'll talk about it on the plane. I'm going to figure something out. So next morning, we get to the airport. He said, well, I can't remember what his exact words were, but basically, unless one of us can squat down and shit out a top babyface superstar, we're switching Luger. Okay, that's what we got to do. So that's why we switched Luger. But then that was a short-term Band-Aid fix, because he wasn't going to drop the belt to Luger like he was Sting, because he had promised the belt to Sting. And in those days, that was a big deal. Who got the belt and whether,
Even under these circumstances.
Well, Lex wasn't ready for it. Sting was.
Okay, well, that's different.
And Lex was a better heel, to be quite honest with you. But we needed to salvage the ratings of the Clash and the cards for the next however many months Sting was going to be out. But that's why that Luger did not win the belt that night because he had promised it to Sting, and he was going to keep his promise, and also Lex wasn't ready for it. It just didn't fit, but we had to put a patch on the tire.
This is the night that the Ruse ads appeared all over the fucking ring. New concept for wrestling. Right? We'd seen it in boxing.
Well, that would have been fine. Ruse were shoes for your feet, pockets for your stuff. These fucking off-brand tennis shoes. The corporate was in St. Louis because Jim Herd didn't know anybody unless they lived in St. Louis, right? And he was able to get a sponsorship from these shoemakers. Do they make Ruse anymore? Have they made Ruse in 20 years? I don't know. But not only that, but he told the company that the guys would wrestle in Ruse. And it was tried a few times, and you can go back and you can find tape from about that time where there's and I mean, everybody said, "Fuck, we're not wrestling in tennis shoes because you could break your fucking ankle." There's no, it's not wrestling boots, and so it happened for a while, but that was quickly canned. But that's the only sponsorship that Herd could get because he knew some guy that worked with Ruse.
It was an over-the-top presentation. I mean, you could do a bumper before and after a match. You can have Norman the Lunatic standing there licking the shoe. Like, you could do something.
Yeah.
Instead of covering the ring all night.
Yeah.
With them.
Everything, everywhere. That's probably, everybody had talked about Mike Shaw, Muckin Singh in Calgary, his great promos, and how that he was a tremendous heel. So they bring him in, and I think Kevin was trying to make chicken salad out of chicken shit in that instance because later on, at least Oldie would make him Trucker Norman or whatever. He was he went from a fucking Arab or Hindu sympathizer to a guy from a lunatic asylum to suddenly they gave him a CDL license and he was driving trucks. I don't fucking know. But that's, Herd wanted, and this will be a recurring theme, Herd wanted kids' characters and stuff. So it was a wild brawl. Mike Shaw, for that size, was a good worker, but we were dealing with what we were given.
How does Mill come to be on the show, first of all?
Well, Jim Barnett, and let me explain. When I talk about Jim Barnett later on, Jim Barnett was one of the 2 or 3 most powerful, most influential men in the wrestling business of the second half of the 20th century. He won promotional wars. He had contacts everywhere, not just in wrestling, but in politics, and he got people out of trouble, and he moved money around, and he's the one that got Roy Shire San Francisco TV and gave him Ray Stevens to go and make San Francisco the biggest drawing wrestling city in the country in the early 60s. And I mean, it can't be understated how powerful, how brilliant Jim Barnett was at one point. However, this was a time where in 1983, when Ole had sort of strong-armed Barnett out of his piece of the Georgia office, and Barnett responded, he didn't cross Jim Barnett, by going to Vince and making it known that Vince could buy the shares of the Briscoes and himself, right, and Jim Oates, Barnett's friend. And that's how Vince got control in 1984 of the Georgia office and the TBS time slot. Barnett worked with Vince up through WrestleMania 3. As a matter of fact, he told me himself that he wrote Hogan and Andre checks for $250,000 apiece as payoffs for that night, and Vince tore them up and wrote them $750 apiece because that's what that meant to his company. But, and maybe we need to get Bruce in on this because he was probably around or almost around at that point, Vince fired Barnett. There was a split in late '87. Barnett at that point tried to, and possibly it wasn't a legitimate attempt, but he tried to commit suicide, possibly a cry for attention. Crockett brought him in as a consultant, and when the sale was made to TBS because of who Jim Barnett was, because he pretty much saved wrestling on the Superstation in the 70s when he won the promotional war with Ann Gunkel, etc., Barnett got an office spot, and Barnett knew that that was his last job in wrestling. At his age and the fact that all the territories were going under and Vince wasn't going to take him back. So at this point, unfortunately, and I mean, Barnett would say what he thought in certain circumstances, and God, I wish he'd have written a book before he died.
Yeah.
Because he was one of the guys with Sam Muchnick and maybe one or two other people that knew where everybody was buried and knew everything that went on and all the intrigue behind the scenes with every promoter in the world. He booked the world champion for years. He knew everything. But at this point, he's taken his consultant's check because he was not the, I'm not saying he was broke, but he was not the multimillionaire that he lived like all those years and gave the impression he was, and this was his last job. So basically, where I was going with this, Barnett's job at that point was to, a lot of cases, say what Jim Herd wanted to hear. So, one of the things, because we were in Corpus Christi, Texas, which is deep South Texas, almost to Mexico, Jim, still living in the 70s, said, we got to have a Hispanic superstar. And of course, the biggest Hispanic superstar is Mil Mascaras, according to Jim, who, you know, when he woke up that morning, it was still 1973. So they booked Mil Mascaras on the Clash of Champions to draw a house in Corpus Christi.
He knew the television went everywhere in the country, right?
Yeah, but we needed a live crowd in Corpus Christi that would make it look good.
Right.
So who's he going to work with? And Cactus actually didn't know this until last year when I told him on one of his, we were doing one of the Q&A after one of his comedy club
on
shows.
On WWE TV?
No.
Okay.
It was on one of his club shows. He didn't, because he was offended that he was booked against Mascaras, because Mascaras not only wasn't going to do the job, he wasn't going to sell, and he wasn't even going to give him anything. And that's the day I did see Mascaras at the airport without his mask. Yes. And that was, I still get goosebumps, right? You know, but that was unusual to see.
No cell phone cameras in 1990, guys.
No, you never saw. No, he couldn't be on the plane with his mask on.
Right.
And when he got off, Flair told me, that's Mascaras. Oh, shit, man, that's cool. Fuck. Of course, he looked like a 60-year-old Mexican businessman at that point, but when he put the mask on, he still had the body at that. Anyway, I booked Mick in that on purpose, because Kevin and I, as I mentioned on the 1989 version, we had backdoored Cactus into a job by making him one of the job guys, because we could book anybody. Flair didn't see in Mick at that time what we all did. And that's where there's some lingering heat over that for quite a while. But Kevin and I loved Cactus. So we booked him as one of the job guys in those matches where the Steiners, whoever would beat Cactus and the partner, and then the heroes would leave, and then Cactus would drop the elbow. And then after 3 or 4 weeks, people were waiting, the stars, get the fuck out of the way, we want to see the guy drop the elbow. We got him over backwards because we had the power to book anybody we wanted as job guys, or to do jobs as long as they weren't winning, right? So that, anyway, I took it a step further. If we got to have Mascaras on this fucking thing, I said, let's put him with Cactus Jack. Because I had seen in Memphis, Cactus did this bump, the Nestea plunge bump, where he got drop kicked and he took a flat back bump off the apron onto the concrete floor. It was the goddamnedest thing I'd ever seen. And I wouldn't want him to do it every night, but we were trying to get this guy over. And I said, I went up to him that night and he was like, Mascaras got there late, and he was just blowing Cactus off. He didn't want to do it. You know, he didn't want to talk about, when Cactus said, what do you want to do to me? He didn't want to talk about it, right? I said, can you take that bump? He said, yeah. I said, all right. So that's the way we set it up, is that Mascaras would drop kick him. And we didn't explain to everybody. Me and Cactus were the only ones that kind of knew what that bump looked like, right? So we didn't really tell anybody because I was afraid somebody would ixnay it. We told Mascaras, you drop kick him, he takes a bump to the floor, he'll crawl back in, you hit him with the cross body, 1, 2, 3, you get your hand up, yay, boom. And Mascaras like, okay,
Happy
right?
about that, yep.
I knew I was doing the commentary. Boom, drop kick, Cactus takes that fucking bump. We felt it in our feet back at the broadcast desk. And I screamed, Cactus Jack is dead. It was the early version of As God is my witness, he's broken in half, right? And the people fucking blew. They'd never seen anything like that. And they heard him hit the floor. Mm-hmm. And then as he crawls back in, we're able to say, once again, look at the fucking goosebumps, seriously. were able to say, my God, can any man, how in the world is he's still living? And he crawls in and Mascaras hits the fucking very anticlimactic crossbody, boom, and 1, 2, 3, and people are like, yeah, get the fuck out of here. And then the fucking band, who was it? Whatever the band was, the guy that was the lead singer in the band that was played was J.T. Southern. Right. He'd worked Memphis also. He was a guy that worked. And they TBS booked this band, or her, I don't know who, it wasn't even heard, but just whatever. But the deal was that the guy in the band was a wrestler and he wanted to get in on some shit also. So I said, then immediately afterwards, we're gonna have Cactus Jack go over and get in a fight with the goddamn band guy. And whether he wins or loses that fight, it doesn't matter, because all the attention everybody is gonna take away from this thing is that goddamn Cactus Jack is insane. And that's exactly what happened.
Now why couldn't he make it in WCW?
Well, he did eventually through his own hard work,
right,
despite every obstacle. And see, once again, if Flair was going to be gone in a couple weeks, and I was going to be gone shortly after that, and then he didn't have as many, supporters.
Well, at this point, he does some jobs for Norman the Lunatic in the weeks after, and then he's gone.
Yeah, I think that was the point where he decided to leave on his own.
Okay.
He did that a couple of times because Cactus was so smart and so confident in what he could do that when he saw, I think he did it another time on a big contract, that when he'd finally gotten a big contract, but he saw that they weren't using him right, he left and went and did Japan and whatever the fuck, until he could come back with a spot, because he would rather lose the short-term money instead of being completely devalued on television, and he was right every time. He had great instincts for that. But yeah, that clash, so the thing was blah, 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 the emergency plan. But Corpus Christi did a sellout, 3,000 people paying $30,000. The Clash did a 4.5 rating, 6.7 share, 2,425,000 homes. And the main event peaked at a 5.9 rating and nearly 4 million homes.
He actually resigns on the 22nd, but let's first do the Flying Brian thing.
Well, Rick wanted to work with Brian Pillman.
Right.
And he specifically said, he booked 2 matches on that taping session. He said, I want to work a single match on a Saturday night show with Brian Pillman, and I want me and Arn to work with Rock and Roll Express on a Sunday night show. Okay, that's what we did. And basically, let's see if I got anything, any other details I don't have here. The Saturday night show on February 17th, 1990, with Ric Flair versus Brian Pillman in the main event, did a 4.0 rating, a 7.8 share, 2,130,000 homes. It was the best rating on TBS for the Saturday night show since February 1987, 3 years. And an all-time high in viewers because of the increasing availability in cable homes. February 18th, Sunday night main event, it did a 4.4 rating, an 8.2 share, 2,324,000 homes, about 5 million viewers, because at that point, the homes, they figured about 2 viewers per home. That was the formula then. So that was about 5 million people. That's for the Sunday night TBS show. It was the best Sunday night, or the best TBS number since December 1985, at an all-time high for the Sunday program. And right here is the specific, wait a minute, where'd we go? There you go. There's the specific numbers that backs it up. This is TBS's own printout. So here's what had happened. When Ric Flair demanded to be made the booker, the previous, I guess it was August, because of the shit that the company was in, George Scott had destroyed everything. And that's the reason they fired him when he didn't promote that Flair and Steamboat match in the Superdome as a Clash of Champions, because he thought it would hurt the house shows.
Right.
He's working for the TV company, and he didn't, anyway. So then, that was the first part of April, they fired George Scott. But as everybody knows that bothers to follow this shit for any length of time, when you change bookers and you change talent and you have a switch like that, things still keep going south for a little while. They didn't hit the bottom until June. That's when there was a booking committee of, and I'm not knocking anybody on it, but it was Jim Ross and Jim Barnett and Jody Hamilton and Jim Hurd and a few other people. And June of 1989 was the bottom. June 1989, WCW Saturday Night did a 1.9 rating. On June 10th. On June 11th, the Sunday Night Main Event did a 1.1. And on June 14th, the Clash of Champions did the lowest rating ever, a 3.8. 8 months later, Ric Flair as Booker had taken Saturday Night from a 1.9 to a 4, Sunday from a 1.1 to a 4.4, and the Clash from a 3.8 to fucking, so, yeah. And Jim Herd would still not leave him the fuck alone. So that's what I mean. That was the final straw that weekend when the ratings came in and Herd still wouldn't leave him alone and was still getting under his skin and was trying to second guess everything he did, which is why he wrote this letter on February 22nd, 1990. He had called me and Kevin and told us he was going to do that. And I'm like, oh, fuck, right? I think we were the only ones that knew until we all went into the booking meeting, and Flair was the only one that was not there, but this copy of this memo was sitting on everybody's chair. I have tried very hard to make the committee work and have spent many long hours analyzing the internal turmoil and the reasons for the turmoil. This is from Ric Flair to Jim Herd. I have come to the conclusion that your interference in the planning of the committee and constant changes exercised by members of the committee without my approval is not workable. You had promised me full control and you have not kept that promise. Please accept my resignation from the committee, effective immediately, and rest assured that I will conduct myself in the same high standard that I have throughout my career. As he was not quitting as a wrestler, but just as the head booker.
Was he justified? You understand?
Yes.
Yeah.
If I'd have been Rick, I'd have knocked Herd out. I would wanted to knock Herd out, and it wasn't even. He was reflecting on all of us, but it was Rick's name on it. It was Rick's reputation in the locker room, in front of the boys. See, at this point, and you can go back and we'll see there were guys on all these guaranteed contracts, and we can get to the money in a minute. It's a list of what everybody was making at that point in time. The guaranteed contracts, guys were calling in with hangnails. Say, I can't work. Right. Or guys were bitching about their spot or their money or their finish or what. There was always substitutions or no-shows, or guys weren't taking it seriously. A couple guys had substance issues because they respected Flair and his ability, but they all knew that Herd was an idiot and didn't know what he was doing. And conversely, they knew that the company, whether it's wrestle in tennis shoes or the ding dongs or the fucking hunchbacks, all this shit was getting around that Herd was doing. Don Glass, who booked us Easter Sunday in the Hemisphere Arena in San Antonio in a predominantly Catholic town for an afternoon show, and there was 500 people in a fucking 17,000 seat building. And the routing in the towns we were running, the boys had no confidence whatsoever in WCW as an office. Not the booking office, but just the office.
Right.
So it was everything was always falling apart. Then Sting gets hurt. It was just we were snake bit. But a lot of this reflected on Flair because if the numbers weren't good, if the houses were the shits, he's the booker. He still had that old school mentality, even though most of the guys realized it wasn't his fault. He was still taking it personally, and that's why he finally said, well, how much more can we fucking do?
Right.
And you still won't shut the fuck up. You don't know anything about this. You're fucking with everything we try to do, so all right, I'll just be the champion and I'll go out and have my great match, and you find somebody else you think can do a better job and see what the fuck happens.
Who takes over for Rick as the head of the committee?
Another committee. Because before it was Ric Flair was supposed to be the booker, and as he said, he was promised control of the booker and had his assistants. Now, I think Terry was there, and poor Terry Funk, he would sit in the meetings, but he had been retired against his will. And then he neither was fish nor fowl because Jody Hamilton was going to, since he had to sit in the office with Herd, he was not going to argue with Herd. JR was trying to do what he could because JR kind of liked Herd as a person but realized he didn't know shit from apple butter about what he was doing. Flair thought that the only people that he could trust were me and Kevin. Barnett was going to say whatever Herd wanted to hear, so all of a sudden Terry's in there, and we all liked Terry, but Terry couldn't even pick a side because he didn't have a side. He was just trying to do what the fuck they asked him to do, so he's sitting over there saying some really great things, but nobody's going to listen to it. So it was just a mess. You can't have a booking committee. You can have a team of writers, because writers can't fucking book wrestling anyway, so it doesn't matter whether there's 5 or 50 of them, they're going to do shit. But you have to have a booker, and you have to have assistants that are going to follow what he says. Follow me through the fucking gates of hell without question, because that's what a booker does. If you go and watch the match, when he and Bobby go over the top rope at the same time, his arm gets hooked under the bottom rope as he's taking the bump off the apron, tore his pec. I don't think he took a day off.
Wow. How do you keep it fresh? Same territory. Here we are, like 5 years, midnights, rock and rolls. What do you have to do to make something continue to work?
At that point, and I said I was going to get into the money, because of the previous contract discussions we had had with Herd, Bobby Eaton and Stan Lane were making $2,250 a week. Tom Zink was making $3,000 a week. Jim Herd, and nothing against Tom Zink, I'd never had a crossword with him. He's a good-looking guy and a good athlete. He could work. I mean, he could have a match. He wasn't a star, wasn't never going to be a star. He didn't have it here or just whatever. He didn't have it.
Right.
But because Jim Herd paid guys who looked good versus people who could draw money and perform, it was an insult that Tom Zink was making $750 more a week than Bobby fucking Eaton, right? And Stan Lane. And so was a few other people making. Sid Vicious and Danny Spivey were making $2,500 a piece a week, more than Bobby. Point is, whereas everybody else was no-showing or selling an injury to get time off and get that mailbox money or griping and grumbling, the Midnight and the Rock and Roll felt the same way because they came in right after that list. I don't have them on that list, but I don't think they were making any more than the Midnight, maybe not quite as much, because they were brought in by Flair and heard, wow, these guys are old news. And they do the big ratings. We channeled our animosity toward that raccoon skin capped motherfucker into going out and saying, okay, whatever we got to do, if we have to fucking, and I used to use this phrase, but now I hate to use it in wrestling, we have to light ourselves on fire, but now people do that, so I don't want to give that impression.
There was a time when that was ridiculous.
That was a time when that was ridiculous, and it was an exaggeration that you would use, but we decided we were going to go out, and no matter what we were, if we had, give us a goddamn crack in the fucking door, put us on national TV, give us a spot on pay-per-view, give us a promise, whatever, we're going to set the fucking building on fire, we're going to leave it in flames, and we're going to come back and say, follow that, motherfuckers, and they couldn't. And that was another case of it. The Rock and Roll and Midnight, there was a 4-star match, back before they gave 5, that was the 4-star match. That was, Meltzer even wrote, these guys were wrestling like their jobs depended on it. Our jobs didn't depend on it, but our pride did. And that's when I did the referee boxing with Nick Patrick, and the Rock and Roll pulled out all their old shed, and the Midnight with Double Team and whatever the fuck. But that was to basically show that, motherfucker, you may not pay us what we're worth. I was making a little more money because I guess I was on a committee, and also I was, Herd had given me, and we talked about this, I'm not going to chew my food twice on the whole 89 thing, buy the DVD. I was making $3,000 a week plus the $300 for the booking committee because Herd gave me, I wanted the same money as the boys like we always had, and I wanted all of us to make $150,000, but he stopped at like whatever $2,250 a week is for the boys, but I even said I'll accept $100,000 when his offer was $100. I said I'll accept $100, but the boys have to have $150 because they're taking the fucking bumps, right? Sure. Bobby's got a family. He wouldn't budge, but because I did commentary and did the hotline, he kept upping my offer every time he would up the boys' offer. So he gave me $50,000 that I didn't ask for. Anyway, that's how stupid he was. So we went out there to prove a point every single time. But here's the thing, even though the ratings were up, even though the talent level was up, they had done such damage, especially to the Carolinas. As soon as TBS bought the company, they pulled out most of the Carolinas' live dates. Greensboro for a pay-per-view only did $86,000. Which 2 years before that wouldn't even have been a good house show.
Yeah.
Greensboro, Starrcade, 86 did 360 whatever thousand. It did $86,000, and we got a $300 payoff and then got a $1,500 pay-per-view bonus, but this was all against our contract pay anyway. Nobody at that time was making more than their contract money because that, like, The next night we did a TV taping in Beckley, West Virginia. We got $200. A taping in Altoona, which we'll get to in a second, $275. Fort Bragg, North Carolina did $42,000. They actually gave us $250. But Amarillo, we went to Amarillo for $22,000. The houses were horrible compared to what they had been until, TBS just screwed the whole thing up. So, we figured we'll prove a point. That's how we kept it fresh, because if Ricky had to if his arm had come out of the socket and ripped off and the bloody stump was hanging there, he would have finished the match.
Kept going.
Yeah,
right.
yeah. He was a sub for Spivey, because
Yes.
I think then Spivey got hurt. And see, here was the thing. Everybody had high hopes for Sid because of the way he looked. I mean, you couldn't draw a guy, that looked like that. But Spivey, the problem with Spivey had been, not only did he was huge, but he had no discernible physique, no muscular definition. He just took up space. And his work was okay for a guy that size, but he had injuries even at that point. And I guess he's had everything replaced since then. But I don't know why he had injuries. He never took any bumps. But he was working like the fucking Road Warriors. And with Sid next to him, somebody has to sell. Somebody has to be vulnerable. Somebody has to just have a match with the baby faces. Later on, when they had the skyscrapers with the dudes, when it was actually Sid it was earlier, it was Sid and Spivey, the previous fall. And they put him with Johnny Ace and Shane Douglas. Mm-hmm. They just ate those fucking guys up, right? And, I knew they weren't going to listen to me. So I went to Ole, because that's when Ole was starting to agent. I said, Ole, can you talk to, and he knew Spivey. I said, can you talk to these fucking guys? Because, they've got to figure out a way to have a match, with guys that we're trying to use. So Ole gets Shane Douglas, Johnny Ace, Spivey, Sid, they're all together. Of course, I'm there because I was at the time was in the dudes' corner. That's when we were doing the thing with the dudes in the midnight. And of course, afterwards, Spivey knew who stooged on him and everything. But Ole says, all right, guys, he said, Danny, I'm looking at you and I'm looking at Johnny Ace. I only see 2 or 3 inches difference in about 30 pounds. So, what the fuck? Well, you would have thought he'd sodomized Spivey's fucking mother as soon as he illustrated that Johnny Ace, who was actually the Road Warrior's brother, an Animal and fucking Hawk, either one could have goddamn picked her teeth with Danny Spivey. But that he was so insulted by that he should sell for either one of these two fucks. And after they all agreed to it, right? And then Ole walks off and everybody shakes hands. I went to shake Spivey's hand. And he just looked at me and walked off. So I'd just like to say to you now, Danny, I've never seen you since then because you're nobody, nowhere, but fuck you just for being a fucking prick to everybody you were working with at that point in time because you thought you were goddamn Superman and the matches fucking stunk.
Let's talk Teddy Long for a minute. Now he's paired with Doom. What do you think of
that? That was the magic thing. Because once again, Teddy at that time had just started managing. Teddy had refereed, and you know Teddy's story. He worked on the road with James Brown, and he had been a radio guy, and he could talk, and he was funny and entertaining. And with the Skyscrapers, they weren't going to listen to anything he said, and it wasn't a match. But with Ron and Butch, they all got along. They were friendly with each other, and plus you had Butch was a veteran, and Ron was a hoss, and they wanted to get over. And so that was a much better pairing, and they had good matches with guys, and they I can't say anybody drew money necessarily at this point, but that was a much better usage of Teddy and a much better team all the way around.
This doesn't do Mike any favors whatsoever, right? I mean, this is more kid-friendly stuff that
I think so because, Rick was gone. I certainly didn't come up with it. I don't know. I don't actually. I have not committed to memory after 27 years where Captain Mike Rotunda came from. I had no problem with Mike Rotunda as a talent, but as the captain of a ship with the yachting cap that I used in my rookie year, to get heat. And you know, and he came out to the music, the Romantics, who were Midnight Express fans, by the way. That's what I like about you. You really tell me. I don't know what the fuck it was.
Yeah,
I don't. It was all over the page. I don't know what the fuck it was. And then they stopped. At least in that case, when they stopped using commercial music, it was a boon.
Well, clearly, someone was a big Gilligan's Island fan working on the booking committee. You know, Mike's a guy that did heel and baby face back and forth. Was he a better heel or a face?
I think I enjoyed him in the Varsity Club. I think he probably was a better heel, although he and Barry Windham were a good team as baby faces. But Mike was a legitimate amateur wrestler and a good talent and could work. And they never found the one thing that would make Mike Rotunda himself be a star. You know, he was in a couple of good tag teams and a couple of good groups, but it just, maybe it wasn't meant for him to be a single. I don't know. This illustrates, and it's not just because I'm in it, but I can tell a story firsthand, but this illustrates how you couldn't fucking get anything accomplished with the talent that you knew could get over and you wanted to use. Flair, thank you very much. Flair had already said we all thought Brian Pillman was going to be a star, right? And that's why he wanted to work with Brian Pillman on that show that did a tremendous rating just a few weeks previous. And he, at one point, had thought of working a long-term singles program with Brian, but Brian needed to be ready because he hadn't been there long, and he wasn't really over as a top guy. Mm-hmm. And I sat down with him right about the time. As a matter of fact, this show was probably written right before Flair quit because we taped it a week later or whatever. I sat down with Rick. I said, all these fucking guys, all the programs we try to start, somebody has a problem, or Sid gets hurt, or Spivey gets hurt, or somebody no-shows or whatever. Give us Pillman. We'll get him the fuck over. And I'm not saying that Brian, we had to lead him around like a child, but that's you took established talent and you used them to get new talent over. I said, give us Brian Pillman and we'll get him over, and then we'll hand him off to you, and you do your fucking thing like you did with Sting, and you make him a fucking star. Rick said, okay, yes. How do you get a babyface over? You find a weakness or an Achilles heel, and the heel wrestlers exploit that weakness surreptitiously with criminal methods and fucking do him wrong, and then the babyface has to fight using his guts and his courage and his superior intellect and his never say die attitude, and he overcomes the insurmountable odds and gets his revenge, right? I found out that, you know, the scar that Brian had on his throat and his raspy voice. Brian Pillman was born with a rare form of some kind of throat cancer. And by the time he was 3 years old, he had 24 operations on his throat, which is what left that scar and led to the raspy voice. And I said, what? Because I said, we're going to get some death threats with this. I want to get more death threats than we got when we set Ronnie Garvin's face on fire, right? That's why in Altoona that night we had a simple match with Brian Pillman and Z-Man. I think it was for the U.S. tag title at that point. Mm-hmm. And in the match, at the end of the match, all kind of shit breaks loose. And you know the Midnight Express Vegematic, where Stan lays the guy out in the bear hug and Bobby came off the top with the leg drop. Mm-hmm. I fucking put my racket on Pillman's throat. Bobby does the leg drop. Pillman sells it like crazy. Then we have a bunch of people panic running in, and it was an old Mid-South or Memphis angle where guys are running in and we're hitting them with the racket. We're nailing them off. We're playing King of the Hill. We're trying to get some fucking fans to come in. I wanted some people to fucking hit and help, right? Because we got to have some fucking chaos here. I want an element of danger. I want to make people think that Brian Pillman is fucked. And then the story was going to be that we had re-injured and re-damaged the restorative surgery that had been done to him as a child, and that he, as a result, may never speak normally again and may have to undergo all that shit again. And we even did interviews. This was why I called it the Phantom Angle, because this shit didn't air, and I'll tell you why in a second. We did interviews with Brian unable to talk, doing this. And Zink having to talk for him, which that was only going to be temporary, but the whole thing was Brian's voice and what we had done to him, and we were going to run this program because Flair knew that Midnight wasn't going anywhere, and we could count on us. we were going to run this whole fucking angle where we had these return grudge matches with Pillman and Zink over the U.S. Tag Team title, culminating with a big blow-off where if they won, then Brian would be able to get his hands on me or whatever, the old 5-minute deal. And in my mind originally, before that match would happen, we would bombard fucking Zink and put him out of the picture. So now Pillman has no partner. So, I guess that match ain't gonna happen. You ain't gonna get your revenge. And Pillman would insist on fighting both the members of the Midnight Express rather than give up his chance. And he would beat both members of the Midnight Express in a handicap match and then jerk me in and beat the shit out of me and beat me. So in one night, in one match, Brian Pillman, this new up-and-coming star, would beat one of the most decorated tag teams in NWA history, former World Tag Team Champions, both of them by himself, and then kick the shit out of me. And then, here you go, Rick, now you take him and do the Sting Clash of Champions thing. That's the way you make a fucking star, by the way. Guess what happened? After we tape all that shit, and you get started with the stuff that was scheduled to air on the formats that Rick, as Booker, had blessed and that we had written, we go in the next week in the committee meeting and Barnett says, well, we're not going to do that. What? I think it will make Brian look weak. What if we want to do the thing with the throat, we can do it with top guys. So basically, he had, like that, saying Midnight Express weren't top guys. And it was because Herd had, I don't know, some way or another, either he was saying what Herd wanted to fucking hear, or Jim was enamored of Brian, or whatever the fuck. But they let the angle run, but they took out the whole throat injury thing, and just fucking everything was normal from then on out. And Barnett looked at me and said, if it doesn't draw, blame me. And I told him, I think about 6 months later, Jim, it didn't draw and I blame you. Right? So at that point, that's when I'm starting to percolate about I got to get out of here too, just like Rick did. But that was, you got all these things they're doing to try to get some of these fucking schlubs over that we'll get to later on in the year, and giving them fucking all this money and everything. And a guy like Brian Pillman, we're letting him do everything but sodomize us with rusty fishing knives to get him over, and they ixnayed it and even took back some of the shit that was taped. Because Herd didn't like the Midnight Express and me, Barnett liked Pillman. I've never got a suitable explanation, but it will make him look weak. He knew better than that. He'd been in the business for 30 years. He invented the fucking wrestling business. He was Herd's hitman in that. Herd didn't want us, because our contracts also were coming up in April, and Herd didn't want us in a main event position.
Well, I was going to say, because it was you guys is the reason.
Yes, and also because he was trying to, when we get to May, he was trying to split the Midnight up, and didn't even want to re-sign them. And he knew our contracts were up in April, and because Herd was, in kind of a way, he's kind of like Heyman. He always thought there was an ulterior motive to something. Instead of us trying to get Brian Pillman over, he thought we were trying to get ourselves over when contract came up so we could hold him up for more money. That's the only reason that's the only thing I've ever been able to figure.
In helping Brian and helping Rick.
Well, because it's putting us on TV, and Herd is not smart to the wrestling business. He just thought it was, we're putting ourselves on TV because we're on the booking
They're
committee.
going to be beat by one guy.
Well, he didn't even get that far. We didn't even make it past the goddamn angle.
Silly.
Well, he'd promised the belt to Sting, and he thought Sting would be the guy. He thought Sting should be the guy. And Lex was a better heel, to be honest, I think. And at that time, since he had just quit as the booker, Ric Flair wanted to get away from Jim Herd, basically. And he saw that this was not going to get any better. It was probably going to get worse. And so he wanted to go up north. And Herd wouldn't let him out of his contract, and so Flair said, all right, you don't let me out of my contract, what are you going to do? Find somebody that's going to fucking take it, because I ain't going to drop it.
This must have happened last minute, right? Because a whole camera crew's flown in. This is at the UIC Pavilion in Chicago, so
well,
they're there to capture something.
It happened last minute because Herd had the camera crew and all that other shit go up without bothering to get Flair to say yes first. Flair sees all these fucking people walking in, what the fuck? Well, we need you to drop the bed. Fuck you. And that's another thing. And they did it to us later on this year. In those days, you gave a champion of any major promotion, the respect of when it was time for them to drop the belt, you told them in advance, you told them what you wanted to do, you got their input, you gave them the date. I mean, Vince Sr., remember, he gave Billy Graham the date he was going to win the belt and the date he was going to lose it a year and a half later or whatever. And, you know, can you imagine Ric Flair when in Chicago? They had fucking Flair sees the goddamn camera crew walking in, and what's that? Well, we need you to drop the belt. Fuck you. He said, you let me out of the fucking contract, I'll drop the fucking belt. Right. Otherwise, if I'm going to be here, I'm going to be the fucking champion, and I'm going to fucking do the business I want to do with Sting as soon as he's ready.
Does Lex have anything to say? Is he disappointed? Not that it matters, but
you know, at that point, I hate to put words in people's mouth. What is it when at the hearing? I hate to project onto the, but at that point, I don't think Lex gave a shit whether he was champion or not. I don't think he wanted to be the champion because then it would be his fault that all the houses sucked in everybody's mind. So I think he probably was like,
yeah,
I'm just over here. I'll do whatever the fuck you want. He wasn't going to argue. He wasn't going to argue with Ric Flair.
Talk to me about Wayne and Mike, the Minnesota Wrecking Crew 2. The gimmicks, the masks. I mean, is this a rush job? What's
yeah.
Not much time put into this one.
Well, Arn was hurt, right? Arn got hurt.
He's recovering, yeah.
Yeah, basically it was, who the fuck are we going to put against the Steiners? Because it was, and that was another angle that we had that when I said that everybody was getting hurt or holding up or whatever the fuck, and the only angles that stayed consistent from start to finish were the Midnights. So that was another situation where all of a sudden now we got nobody to work with the Steiners.
Right.
So let's get these two guys and put them under masks. And
they were the current AWA champs at the time. Do you remember that?
Yeah, but that
How'd that happen?
That was like being the nicest guy in prison at that point in time. No, it was 1990.
1990, you're right.
I mean, it was 1990 in the AWA. Those guys were working for ham sandwiches and a fucking Coke. And, but that's why as a concession to not, make Vern and his whole territory look like shit, they put him under masks.
Right.
Anybody that comes out of a box gets over.
Did this guy really say anything that comes out of a box gets over? I remember someone recounting that story.
I did. I said that. And it's true. If you go back through history, and especially since Abby at that point in time had not been on TBS television in probably, what was the last time he worked for Crockett? 85? So 4 or 5 years. And who would expect that? And nobody looked like Abdullah the Butcher. No human being walking the planet looked like Abdullah the Butcher. And he had a history, and people could buy him. His shit was very believable, especially, sometimes when you worked with him. And that was JR's deal. It was not mine. I love people coming out of a box, but that was JR shepherded that Abbey thing because he had faith in Abdullah the Butcher's aura. He wasn't there for 3 years. He wasn't going to have long programs with Ricky Steamboat or whatever.
And he's only there a couple of weeks.
To make an impact and dress up the TV show.
But as a face.
Because, once again, theoretically, if Kevin Sullivan who's in Kevin's group at that point? What the fuck? Who we got here? I got formats, contracts, booking sheets. Point is, Kevin works well with freaks. He just does.
Yeah.
And it's the flavor of things. So when Kevin has this fucking group, here comes it was Cactus. Yeah,
he's Cactus,
because Cactus
Kevin,
is now buddied up with Kevin because Kevin won't take Cactus under his wing, help get Cactus over, and Cactus had an affection for Abby. They could all work well together. But here comes Abdullah the Butcher as an impact because if the heels have any heat, if a heel has any heat, then the people want to see somebody that's more evil, more nasty, bigger, stronger, dirtier, more bloodthirsty. Give the heel a taste of their own fucking medicine for a couple weeks. It wasn't like we were going to like when George Scott came in and signed the Iron Sheik to a 2-year contract. that he worked 3 months of, and then they sent him home and then forgot to fucking send him his notice, and it rolled over for a second year. He made more per match than fucking Flair did.
You're a purist.
Yes.
And there's Norman the Lunatic with the beanie and the propeller, and Abby's in this now. What are we doing?
Well,
Do we shit on the legacy of Abdullah the Butcher? I mean, there's the Sheik.
No, Abby didn't. Abby
and
didn't
now
come
he's-
out. Abby didn't come out speaking normally, and suddenly having gone to college, and and trying to get kids to fucking eat right and stay off drugs. He came out as the madman from the Sudan that's now going to give that fucking nasty Kevin Sullivan a taste of his own medicine for a couple weeks, and maybe he'll get some ratings.
Take me through the contract issues you're having, and what are the negotiations like now?
Well, basically, at that, I believe that was the time, and I'd have to read my book here real quick, but I came in with a stack of papers. Imagine that. Here's the ratings. Here's the numbers. Every time Bobby Eaton's in a main event with Ric Flair, it's the highest rated show of the month. Every time the Midnight Express is on the show, by the way, we haven't missed anything. We're the only ones that haven't missed any dates, that have consistently performed. Everybody raves about the matches. They tear the house down. All the statistics and all the facts. Herd's response was he wanted to make me an announcer, sign Bobby Eaton to a contract for less money, and put Stan on a per week verbal deal, and split them up as a team. You can imagine what my response was to Jim Herd. That's when, as the time JR told me in a corner one time, he said, well, because he every once in a while would tell me what Herd said behind my back when I wasn't there. Herd said, talking about me in the Midnight, said, I haven't seen such loyalty since Korea. I was not interested in breaking up the greatest performing tag team at that time in the business. I was not interested in not managing them, and I was not interested actually, and if that was the case, in working for WCW anymore. We would do something else, whatever that else may be. And as a matter of fact, when was it? It was February 11th in Knoxville, Tennessee. We had a match with the Rock and Roll Express, did $37,000. It was 4,000 people. That's when I said, Knoxville, these people are still coming. This is one of the only good houses we've done in I don't know how long, and they love wrestling. There could be a territory here. So in the back of my mind, I had, as soon as I can get the fuck out of here, right? Because I'd already met Rick Rubin.
Right.
So I was just, at this point, I was marking the time off on, on the contract and everything, right? Because I wasn't going to turn down $150,000 yet. So anyway, that was the negotiation, and I was like, fuck, we ain't going to get anywhere with this fucking guy. So tell you what, we're probably going to be done. But then I talked to Rick. I said, wait a minute. How about this? Because the Four Horsemen was two. Because Ole was
Right.
in the office, and reluctantly at that, and wasn't going to wrestle anymore. So it was Flair and Arn. We had nobody else. The roster was coming and going, and as you can see, starting to go to shit. I said, all right, how about if we put everybody in the place they want? I will retire as a manager, and I'll just do the announcing on TBS. Sign Bobby Eaton and Stan Lane to another contract for the same terms, and we will make them the other two of the Four Horsemen. And Flair was all over this because woman would use her womanly wiles to make this negotiation. Mm-hmm. That way, the Horsemen could be restored to at least where the not only were the Horsemen best friends in real life and a great group, but also they were known as being the best working in-ring heels in the company. That's what made the Horsemen. Mm-hmm. So now you've got the four best in-ring working heels, again, as a group of horsemen. And the Midnight Express has a pedigree. It's not like we put two schlubs in the fucking Horsemen. They've been World Tag Team Champions, U.S. Tag Team Champions. He gets Bobby and Stan another contract. He gives Herd what he wants, which is, for whatever reason, to just break us apart. And it benefits the company and the product. It benefits the boys, and then we can last out our contract, is what I'm thinking. The next one we sign in April, and then wherever the fuck we go, we go. Because I was in the back of my mind, I thought Herd can't last forever because nobody can fuck shit up like this bad. Because, I mean, shit's dropping like fucking flies, you know, everywhere. Mm-hmm. So I'm thinking maybe if we stay a year like George Scott, we'll outlast Herd.
Well, the committee approves this.
Yes.
Why does Herd not?
He did. More on that. Hold on here. Okay, the negotiations I had were after the March 13th TV taping. Or during that period of time, because on March 14th, I went to Hawaii with my wife at the time. And I was gone because I had to get away from these fucking people. And I was gone until March 22nd. I came back in Toledo, Ohio. I had gone to Hawaii. This was the deal that we had made. And then we were going to re-sign the contracts. Everybody's going to be happy. And this show was written. I get back from Hawaii, and JR is at the show, and he says, Jim, I need to talk to you. What's the matter? He said, Herd's decided not to do the deal. I said, what are you talking about? He said, he changed his mind. He doesn't think the Midnight should be members of the Horsemen, so he's not going to do it. And I'm still a member of the booking committee at this point, right?
Not for long, but yes.
Exactly, for about another 13 seconds.
Exactly.
Because I said, this is fucking it. This is fucking it. He said, no, he said, because, JR's always tries to be diplomatic and professional. He says, Corny, he says, come to the booking meeting in Chicago on the 23rd, I believe it was, at the airport somewhere, and before our show, and plead your case. I said, JR, let me tell you something. And this is I swear to God, I remember this better than I remember anything in my life. I said, I'm not coming to that booking meeting tomorrow or ever, because if I do, I will plead my case by taking these two fingers and putting them 2 knuckles deep in Jim Herd's eye sockets. I quit the booking committee, and when our contract is up here in 4 or 5 weeks or whenever it is, we're done. We'll be out of the way, and that motherfucker can take this company and shove it up his fucking ass, and it'll rot. It'll rot there, like bad beef in his fucking colon, right? And that's exactly what I did. And by the way, if you'll notice, when I get my payoff, no, you know what? It was Canton, Ohio at the taping. It was Canton, Ohio, not Toledo. I knew it was Ohio, but we came back and worked this weekend.
Yeah, the handwriting gets more maniacal.
We came back and worked this weekend, St. Louis and Baltimore and Johnstown, and then in Canton, Ohio. That's when he told me. I knew it was Canton. But anyway, if you will notice, the next time that I get a booking committee, remember I was supposed to get $300 a week? Yeah. And they paid you every 2 weeks then on your contract and everything. So like we were getting these drizzly payoffs, like Philadelphia, April 7th, did $40,000. That wasn't even 4,000 people in Philadelphia. We got a $250 payoff. Atlanta, I didn't even have the house recorded. It was so shitty. Our contract payment for the 2 weeks, which basically made up what we were supposed to be making from the payoffs, was $2,869, but the booking committee fee, $128.58. He prorated it. He didn't even give me the whole week. He prorated from the last period until the 2 or 3 days or whatever it was that I said, fuck you, and quit it. So I got $128.58. That was my last booking committee payoff. But at any rate, and we're working every night now, by the way. We still have never missed a fucking match. We're working with Brian and Zink, but just regular matches and, doing a finish or whatever. They're winning almost every night. So it's basically when he told me that, yes, arriving at the taping, I said, it's in the book. I should have read my own book. Herd vetoed everything. I worked the tapings that night. I did color on both shows. So anyway, at the booking committee meeting, which was on fucking 28th in, before Harrisonburg, Virginia, after the TV, they all flew to Atlanta and did the booking committee meeting. So we go to Hampton, Virginia. I stay on the road. We go to Hampton, Virginia on March 29th. We walk in the Hampton Coliseum, and there's Wahoo, because Wahoo now is one of the agents.
Okay.
And they put him on the committee also. We passed in the night. I loved Wahoo, but we didn't even get a chance to work together because he started right as I quit. He told us, he said, boys, we had a meeting in Atlanta today. And every single one of us overruled Herd. Jim Ross and myself and whoever else was on the committee. everybody said that he should renew you guys. And so you're renewed at the same terms for another year. And I pitched my fucking bag of and Stan Lane kicked his goddamn suitcase and his gun. And of course, Bobby never gets mad, and he just sat down. And Wahoo's like, what the
Thanks, Wahoo.
I said, Wahoo, I said, we were wanting to fucking leave. We couldn't wait to get the fuck out of this goddamn zoo. He had never seen anybody be greeted with, we've all got you 6-figure contracts guaranteed for another year, and we're fucking pissed, right? So that was one of the worst days of my fucking life.
Does Eddie, when he's in WCW, is he suggesting things like that, creative ideas, or is he just one of the rank and file?
Here's the problem. And I loved Eddie. He's a month older. He was a month older than I was. And we grew up, we were photographers together. He was down on the Memphis end. I was in the Louisville end. We used to keep in touch. When he first got into business, he loved his dad. He first started as Tommy Gilbert Jr. And he wanted to be just like his dad, and he grew up wanting to be like Jerry Lawler. And sometimes to his detriment, he did a little too much of it. Even like in Philadelphia, he was trying to be the king and et cetera in Eastern Championship Wrestling. But Eddie was a great worker, great promo. He had two problems. He wasn't as big physically as his talent was, and secondly, he had that car wreck, fucked his neck up early in the WWF, and it never... If you notice the way he took bumps and the way he sold, he never had full motion, and it caused him problems with, different things. But he had been on the committee the previous summer, and I replaced him. And I'd never had a booking job at all, right? So it's not like I'm just going to say, well, I'd like that spot. He got sideways with Flair, because they ran a show in Memphis, and it was Eddie Gilbert versus Ron Simmons. And when you look at it, Eddie's 6 feet tall maybe, and 215 pounds, and there's Ron fucking Simmons. And Flair he thought Ron Simmons was a hoss, and he wanted to use him. And when Flair had just taken the book, they have the show in Memphis, Flair wasn't there, but Eddie, as a member of the committee, had the finishes. And the story I got was basically that Eddie thought that, well, he's got Ron Simmons beating me in Memphis. This has to be some kind of mistake, because it's Eddie Gilbert and it's Memphis. Mm-hmm. And Flair didn't give a fuck about Memphis because he never watched Memphis wrestling, and I love Memphis wrestling. And so I didn't have a dog in that fight. I wasn't even there, as Davey would say. It was Owen. I wasn't even there. Eddie changed the finish, and Flair heard about it. And that's when Flair had called me, and it was like August or whatever, and said, do you want to be on the booking committee? I said, God, oh my God, does Pope shit in the woods? And I said, Rick, I'll do anything for you, right? And he said, the other guy, he always said, whenever he didn't want to mention somebody's name he was pissed at, he'd call him the other guy.
That's
the other guy.
Defacing someone.
There's going to be an opening pretty soon, because the other guy's not with me. He's not loyal. He's not on the bandwagon, whatever the fuck. So the reason I'm telling this is because Eddie had one time told a story, and I'm sure he remembered it that way, and I'm sure he was pissed off about it. But he had told the story that he walked in the booking committee meeting one time, and I was sitting in his chair. And that's the way he found out about it. That was not true. For one thing, we didn't have assigned seating. And for another thing, Rick asked me if I wanted to be on it and said, keep it under your hat and don't say anything, and I got to do some things first. And Rick arranged to put Eddie off the committee and then brought me on. So it wasn't a situation where I didn't replace Eddie. I came on, he went off, but it was unrelated. So I just wanted to clear that up. But so since then, he had been it's awfully hard to go from being in a booking position to being one of the boys. And especially when Eddie knew he could book fucking wrestling, and he could get a lot out of a little, and he was frustrated. He was as frustrated, probably, or more frustrated as we were. We knew we could perform better. He knew he could book things differently, is the way he saw it. So he pretty much wanted to get the fuck out of there too. Horseman to ring, Sting at ringside, close, cover shot of ring as wrestlers attend to Sting and Luger. So
they don't even make mention in the format.
No, because then if it was a surprise, somebody would have seen it.
Right.
Well, then in that case, it was a last-minute deal. See, here's another thing, and you'll see this on the video when you B-roll. These formats are not like this fucking hokey horseshit that you see leaked on the internet now, where the format for Raw even when it was a 2-hour show, is 13 fucking pages. This was the 1-hour show, this page.
Right.
Because you had the matches and the interviews, and if you're going to go to the announce desk or whatever, that's all we put on paper.
You guys did the rest.
Because if you put the shit on paper that would indicate that this shit isn't real, and somebody's got the paper, then they would know that the shit wasn't real. So you didn't write finishes down, shit maybe. And this was actually pushed it a little bit. Cover shot of ring as wrestlers attend to Sting and Luger. That would allude to there was some reason to be attended to. So even that, sometimes that comment wouldn't have gotten by a year or two previously. And this was, we did the rest verbally. You sat everybody down and you fucking told them what was going to go on. And the director kind of knew sometimes, and the cameramen didn't need to know, because if it's happening in front of them and they don't fucking shoot it, get new cameramen. The blank spots were for job guys to be filled in, because you basically, here's the list of pre-tapes once again, that would happen. That on the different shows, and what we needed. And then here is the order of live events for the entire night, so that you could put this on the wall. We would fill the job guys in. Since I was not on the booking committee anymore, I didn't fill these job guys in. But you'd fill the job guys in and you put that on the wall, and that way everybody would know when they were up. And otherwise, here's the format for the NWA Power Hour. That was a Friday night TBS show. Louisville Slugger with guest Lex Luger. Luger discusses cage match for world title versus Flair at Capitol Combat Saturday, May 19th. That was the script.
That was it. So everything discussed would then come from you guys entirely.
Of course.
Right.
Yeah,
Okay.
because if you put it on paper, somebody might get it, and then that proves the shit's fake. This was high-tech wrestling formats at the time, because a lot of times, most territories didn't want to put this much on paper. Because even if this shit was found, people could insinuate that there were, things going on. And there's the set close with Jim Ross and Gordon Soley, and that's the bullet points that the announcers would talk about. And then everything else was gone over verbally with the guys as they sat down. This is the NWA main event. This was kind of a kabuki-ish type of format, because there was two main events at that time. There was the TBS main event and the syndication main event. And the commercial breaks were slightly different. Even though most stuff was the same, you would put maybe a few other pre-taped interviews in, so that was a double format show. See this, the total runtime, 54:50, total runtime 58:57.
With the commercial minutes.
Commercial 14:20, 14:12, show 40:30, 44:45. And, and there's syndication. Here's center stage. Here's what the job guys filled in.
So you'd have them blank when this was typed.
Yeah, and because you didn't know who was going to show up.
Right.
It's fucking job guys. And then, once again, there's your matches. There's the bullet points over there with the towns that are coming up. Plug the Power Hour Friday night. Here's what's on the main event tomorrow. Just because one piece of paper, the announcers can look down at the desk and refer to that and see exactly where they are. And the reason why I like this also is because it starts at the top and finishes at the bottom. So instantly, if I'm calling this wrestling match in the middle of the ring and it's in segment 3, then I could look down segment 4. Okay, that's next, boom, boom, and I see it. And it's like drawing a picture of the show as it's going to air, as it happens. If you've got all this goddamn gaga and all this stuff that's going to go on, and most people don't need to know that shit anyway. And if you have it written down where there's one segment is this much writing, it just on a glance, how are you going to look down and go, wait a minute, where the fuck we at?
Right.
It's fucking ridiculous.
Gotcha.
So anyway,
Excellent.
Wyndham came in as a surprise. So there's the Capitol Combat typed out format for May 19th, which we'll get to here shortly, I bet you.
So his coming back is the brainchild of whom?
Whoever was able to make at that point in time, JR was probably the lead on the committee at that point because this was probably right before Herd made Ole the guy. So it was just, once again, is talent available? I can't remember whether Barry had just been in the WWF and had left there or whether he'd been off for a while. I know he was injured at one point there during that period of time. That had been the fall of '89. Kendall Windham was working with us at the time, doing some underneath matches. And I got a call from Kendall saying, well, I'm not going to be able to make the shows because me and my dad got popped with some counterfeit money. And I said, what? And at the time, bless him, Kendall said, well, we worked an independent show and the guy paid us in counterfeit money. Well, come to find out, it was like $2 million in counterfeit money. So I said, Kendall, next time I saw him, I said, Kendall, what'd you fucking sell out the Orange Bowl to get that payoff? What the fuck? So since I was the only member of the committee that, for whatever reason, I wasn't on the road that day, they got me from the office, or he got me on the phone at home, and I called the office, and I said, take out Kendall Windham on these cards and put in whoever's not working, whatever. So the next time we have the fucking booking meeting, Herd starts off on a rant, and I'm going to tell you what, we're going to stop having all these card changes and all these substitutions. And I'm looking at you, Cornette, when I say that. I said, what are you talking about? He said, well, you just changed the cards. I said, the fucking guy's in jail. What do you want me to do, bake a cake with a fucking file in it? And he's yelling at me because I took the guy off the cards that's fucking in jail. Motherfucker. So anyway, yeah, so that was, so Barry coming back, Barry at, primo worker, at 2 years previously, 3 years previously, he'd been the best in-ring talent in the business. Mm-hmm. So, we got Barry Windham back. And Tony Schiavone. I told Tony, when Tony came in, he had a book, the big book, just like Vince, uses for the booking book, and he had all his paperwork together, and he had all his pens and everything, and he was ready to go to work. He'd gone up to this big company, seen how they did it, and he's going to come down and he's going to make a difference. I said, Tony, in 2 months, your hair will be falling out, and you will hate the wrestling business. And the prophecy came true. And he has recently said that leaving the WWF was the worst mistake he ever made in his life.
Now, how about JR? I mean, was there tension between the two of them still at this point?
I don't know, and once again, I don't want to read either guy's mind. I didn't sit down. I'd known Tony since we started working for Crockett, and I'd known JR before that, so I didn't sit down and ask either one of them if there was heat, and I don't think there was on JR's position. I think also at the same time, once again, Herd probably, instead of looking at Tony Schiavone like he's over with our audience, he's been on TBS before, he knows the guys in the NWA style. I think he was just thinking, we stole somebody from the WWF. So that'll be a big deal. That was the last thing we wanted to do was do anything like the WWF. We should have been different, and Herd continued to try to do everything like the WWF and fail miserably. Listen to this loop. They sent us, starting May 4th, Boston, Massachusetts, right? And Bobby loses to Johnny Ace. And Stan beats Dutch in a single match with a small package. It wasn't in the Boston Garden. It was in this goddamn college gym that we couldn't hardly even find. We had to stop a cop and ask him how to get to this thing. And actually, I got trapped. Dutch was in the back seat. And I started to make an illegal left turn to get in the back of this fucking college gym parking lot. And I didn't know the Boston thing because I wasn't really New England savvy. And I'm straddling a fucking train track in the median of this road in the middle of town is train tracks. Yeah. And as I'm trying to turn, here comes a fucking train. And Dutch is trying to get the goddamn seatbelt. He's, Jesus Christ, he's stuck. And I hit the fucking gas and off we go. So we almost got run down and killed. Then the next day we are off, but we can't go home because the next day we're in Fredericton, New Brunswick. Oh. So here's what happened here. We go and have this horrible show where the boys are in 2 single matches and underneath matches. And then we're sitting in what was the hotel in Boston? It was like a Super 8, only not as nice. Stan cracks up. And the mirror cracks, right? Stan says, fuck it. He goes to the airport, gets on a plane, flies home. The first time the Midnight Express has got the disease that everybody else had, right? So he called us and told us, he said, I'm going home. Oh, fuck, all right. And at that point, I think he intended never to come back. But he went home. So we go to Fredericton, New Brunswick. It's Bobby Eaton and Kevin Sullivan against the Road Warriors. Guess who won that fucking match? Then we go to St. John, New Brunswick. Now, Fredericton, we got a $200 payoff. I think there may have been 300 people there, right? In St. John, we're driving a rental car, and I'm sick as a dog, but now I can't go home. I mean, I've literally 103-degree fever, and I had to go to the doctor and get antibiotics in the next few days, but I can't go home because Stan already has. And in fact, I can't leave Bobby up there alone, and Dutch is traveling with us, and he's fucking miserable. So we're all fucking sick and miserable and everything. We drive to St. John, and there's a huge line of people outside the building. And our hotel is right across the street, so we're thinking, fine, at least we'll have a good house. So we fucking see this headline from the newspaper, Wrestling Card Gassed. Please shoot that, Wrestling Card Gassed. We get our bags and we leave the hotel and we're walking across the fucking street, right? And we see David Crockett, and David Crockett's waving like this. Go back, go back. What are you talking about? It's a hockey arena. There's an ammonia leak from the ice freezing apparatus. And there's ammonia in the entire arena. You go in, your eyes water. They've got big industrial fans. They're trying to fucking blow the... So they said, we're keeping the people out here. Just go back, come back in 30 minutes. We go back in 30 minutes, and we go in the building, and as soon as you walked in, your eyes watered and your nose started to fucking melt. And Bobby goes in the locker room and sets his bag down, starts taking his shoes off. I said, Bobby, fuck, we got to get out of here. It's going to kill us. Well, corny. We got a crowd, you know. So they canceled the show. The only good house we had, they had to cancel the show. And this was the new headline in the newspaper next day, Wrestling Card Gassed. I said it was a mercy killing, right? So the next day, we go to Halifax, Nova Scotia, and now I'm just down to Bobby, and he puts Animal over, because I think then Hawk had left and gone somewhere, because he was cracking up. And then finally we come back to Syracuse, where I went to the commission doctor and got some antibiotics because I was about to have to go to the hospital. He said, you're days away from fucking pneumonia and death. And actually, I think Stan came back. We talked Stan into coming back because we beat Johnny Ace and Johnny Stewart because Shane Douglas somehow he was either hurt or cracked up or whatever. Then we go to Rochester, then Saginaw, then Detroit, then Chicago. Okay, so now bear in mind, we left home. I'm building to something here. Bear with me. We left home on Friday, May 4th, and we went through that whole goddamn thing, a day off in Boston, the cancellation, all these fucking horrible shows. It's a week and 3 days later, we go to Indianapolis for TV on May 14th. We have gone through all this shit, and we haven't been home and fucking seen our families in 10 days. And we walk in, and Herd comes because it's a TV taping, and he walks down the hallway, and there's me and Bobby and Stan coming in. He's coming this way, and he's got a fucking manila envelope in his hand. It's our new contracts that he'd agreed to, that the agents overruled him on, right? He hands them to me. He says, you know what he says when he hands me our new contracts? He said, you know I was against this. I said, motherfucker, so were we.
So let's tear this up and go home.
So were we. And I swear, if Bobby Eaton hadn't had 3 children, not only would we have torn the contracts up, I believe at that point Stan was even going to just fucking punch. And Stan, we know from that lawsuit in Beckley, one shot will crush your fucking orbital socket. So that's the way Herd was treating the employees. And then we went back to Battle Creek, Michigan, and Dayton, Ohio, before 2 weeks later, we got to go home. That shit.
No, that was a grind.
Fucking
that was
prick. So they've revamped this fucking Glow Wrestling.
What was your opinion of Glow at the time? I got to know.
Well, my opinion of the revival of Glow Wrestling is what Dennis Miller once said about the reunification of East and West fucking Germany. I didn't enjoy their previous work, and I'm not anxious to see the new stuff. It was a goddamn joke, embarrassment, hoo-ha, cartoon fucking wrestling, even though it was girls, and it wasn't meant to be taken seriously. It was obviously phony fucking wrestling at a time where real wrestling was not supposed to look phony. And as soon as I saw it, it gave me fucking sour belches, and I was horrified that they would show it on TV.
Is it possible that, I'm just going to take devil's advocate here, Glow was a sitcom about something serious, not unlike maybe, what was that show about football? The First and 10 that was on HBO. The comedy show about...
Sitcoms are funny. This was just bad. It wasn't funny. It just made wrestling look bad and made TV look bad. I don't know. Whatever it could be.
I think it wasn't supposed to be wrestling. I think it was supposed to be...
Then they should have stayed out of the fucking ring.
Okay, very good.
Goddamn. Okay, if I'm fucking Gordon Ramsay... Do I want some fucking jack off in fucking, a Ronald McDonald outfit fucking cooking in the goddamn kitchen on a fucking cooking show and he's killing my fucking business or what? As poor analogy. You've got me so frazzled I can't form a cogent simile. Fuck Glow and anything it looks like Glow. It was fucking cartoon bullshit fucking wrestling. Same fucking situation we're in here right now today. Oh, good God. Well, there you go. There you go.
Why is this decision made?
Why not? No, I mean...
Is it the hope that putting him with someone talented will get him to that
and that's the thing. No human being looked like that.
Right.
Right? So if you put him with Ric Flair and with Arn Anderson and Ole, they badgered Ole to get back on camera about that point. They had high hopes, and Sid made a lot of money in the wrestling business. And I mean, right now, as Ole said about me one time, I'll say the same thing about Sid. Ole said, Cornette, I used to think you were a dumb fuck, but so many other dumb fucks have come along worse than you. You've moved up the ladder without doing anything. Sid would be one of the better workers in the business these days.
So, what did Rick and Ole think of Sid?
I once again, I don't want to reflect. Everybody was, look at him, but, and plus Herd was pushing for it. And, Sid, if he had just understood how to work like a giant but be vulnerable sometimes, he had the promo, it just something didn't, but he wasn't ever dedicated fully. I mean, I've told the story on another one of our releases where when he was in the WWF, he was making $400,000 a year. He fucking got hurt or whatever, and he went home, and Vince finally was fed up and said, tell fucking Sid he's got to be at Raw on Monday. He doesn't have to wrestle, but he's got to do a promo. Paying him $400,000 a year. So I called his wife. He was playing softball. I'm not lying about that. And I said, Sid's got to be there. Well, he hasn't worked out in a couple weeks, and he hasn't tanned. I said, Vince says he needs to be there to do a promo in San Antonio at Raw. She said, sometimes Sid feels like he'd be happier if he went back to selling farm chemicals. Maybe we all would too. So he goes to San Antonio and comes out on the stage with all the other big baby faces at the start at Seg 1, and then in Seg 7, we supposed to do the interview. We're looking around for Sid. Here comes fucking Bruno, Harvey Whippleman. Said, where's Sid? He said, I just took him back to the hotel. He thinks he's having a heart attack. So you didn't take him to the hospital? He said, no, he wanted to go to the hotel. He thinks he's having a heart attack. And he didn't show up. He went back to the hotel, didn't do the fucking promo. And that's when Vince told him that he was going to prorate his contract. He was only going to pay him for shows that he showed up for. And he wasn't going to get paid for shows he didn't. And that's when Sid never came back. But also, I told Herd one time, because Herd loved Sid. He just loved the way he looked and everything. I said, Jim, you'd rather have Sid Vicious than Arn Anderson, wouldn't you? He said, what do you mean? I said, well, Sid Vicious is the kind of guy that would make you $1 million in one night on pay-per-view. He said, well, what's the matter with that? I said, because after the people see it, they never want to see it again. I said, but Arn Anderson will draw you steady money for 20 fucking years. He couldn't get it.
Didn't.
So does this mean there's no more committee? It's Ole in the driver's
Well,
seat
there was still a committee, but Ole took the Flair spot in that there has to be a guy, head booker, right? So Ole was named the head booker, but he still had to talk to Jim Barnett and Jim Hurd and Jody Hamilton and Jim Ross and whoever else at the time. I can't. So many people came in and out. Whoever else at that time, but they gave Ole, actually, when you think about it, as you'll see with the talent that comes in and the things that go on, he gave Ole much more freedom than he'd given Flair. And the talent roster and the numbers show it. As a matter of fact, by the end of April, remember that 4.0 on Saturday night that Flair got? Down to 2.6. Remember the 4.4 on Sunday? Down to 2.7. Nearly in half.
What's your reaction when you hear Ole's given control?
I didn't really mind at that point because I figured, Jesus, anybody knows more about wrestling than Hurd, and I didn't know what Ole was going to do, and I've made amends with Ole since then, but it was brutal. It was brutal to fucking watch because, and once again, people accuse me of being behind the times or stuck in the past or whatever. I want to do angles and logic that worked 10 years ago, but with guys that were, I said one time in OVW, I tried to do wrestling logic from the 80s with guys that were born in the 80s, when that was 20 years ago or whatever. They were 20-something years old. I wanted to use new talent, but have wrestling make sense like it did. Both George Scott and Ole wanted to use the same guys that drew them money 15 years beforehand. Instead of doing the same things with new talent, you've always got to get the new talent over, but you can recycle the angles, but you can't recycle the fucking talent.
How's he to deal with if you have a concern about something?
Easy. Say, Ole, I'm really worried about this. Well, fuck off.
That's it, right. Funny tidbit, an interview with a fan at home in Philadelphia watching with his family, turns out to be Todd Gordon.
I did not know that.
Yes.
I never knew that. Son of a bitch. The reason why he was referred to as a pretender to the throne of Hulk Hogan is because at that point, Vince had convinced everybody, especially in the news media that centered in New York, that he was wrestling and that he was, I mean, it's not like it took much convincing. He was, at that point, the number one company by a large margin. And it was like, instead of going into like most everything you see on the news, instead of going into the depth of things to find out the details and the truth, they could have said, well, this company was hugely successful and was competitive with Vince only 3-4 years ago, but after Turner Broadcasting bought it, it's fallen in a fucking hole. How would that have looked? And now they're trying to climb out. So all of a sudden they just presented it like it was this new company that was trying to take over this established, you know. I was actually still, this was planned so far ahead, I was still on the committee. Because, now, bear in mind, a guy like Barry Windham returns and it's fucking last minute and all this other shit happens last minute, but this fucking stunning angle was planned 3 months out.
The works.
Months and years in the making. At one of the last meetings I was at, they said, wow, we're going to have RoboCop, the real guy. What? They'd made arrangements because the movie was going to be coming out. It was going to be a tie-in. The posters, that's another thing. If you go back into the ad, as a matter of fact, do I have an ad in here? Yeah, no, that's the Clash. Shit, I didn't reprint the ad in here, but it was like a movie poster, the return of RoboCop. It had a big picture of RoboCop. You wouldn't have known it was a wrestling card. So maybe the RoboCop fans would have fucking bought it. They said, we're going to have the real RoboCop on, and we got to figure out something for him to do. And they said, but now here's the parameters. In the guy in the suit, And it might not have even been the real, maybe it's the real RoboCop suit, because somebody said maybe it wasn't Peter Weller or whatever.
Peter Weller would have been the actor.
Well, I don't know who the fuck Peter Weller was, and fuck Peter Weller,
Fuck
anybody
him
looks
too.
like Peter Weller, right? But it was the real RoboCop suit, and they said the deal was he can't fall down, because if he falls down, he can't get back up. And he can't climb stairs in this suit. And he can't run. He moves. Basically, he can walk at a slow gait forward.
So
is what he can do.
So he's Abby at this point.
See, you. So we had to figure out something. Somehow he could be involved in a meaningful way, and they came up with the idea that there would be a cage at ringside because he could spread the fake bars. So that's why I ended up getting put in that fucking cage at ringside. So there would be a cage sitting there. There was a purpose for the cage sitting there. They fucked our match up.
You were there to get RoboCop.
I was there to get RoboCop over. And my thing was always I would fucking try to get out of the cage and everything. I said, no, don't touch the fucking bars, because the bars were gimmicked. Because he couldn't really pull fucking bar. So I couldn't touch the cage and do all this shit and everything. And so, already now the Midnight Express match is handicapped because I'm stationary. There's no good reason for me to be in this cage because Pillman and Zink had been beating us like fucking redheaded stepchildren and government mules for the previous 3 months. But now to keep me from interfering, I'm going to be in this cage that I can't fuck with. And just to make sure that it doesn't make any sense at all whatsoever, guess what the finish was? We won the U.S. Tag Team titles.
Yes,
we
you
beat
did.
Pillman and Zink in the complete opposite of a fucking blow-off. They've been beating us for 3 months, and now the manager is neutralized, and the babyface is in an even fight.
Yeah.
I honestly think Ole felt sorry for us and just threw us a fucking bone. Because that's the only explanation I've ever had for why that we beat them and won the belts when the one match they should have won, and they didn't.
The thing is that there's a DQ in a cage match.
Yeah.
This violates some kind of religious order in professional wrestling, does it not?
Here's the thing. Well, it didn't used to. Because in the 60s and 70s, when people were more forgiving and before they get smart, you could do things like that if you could either blame the heel for something bad or the babyface could take credit for something good, the fans were fine with it. This is 25 years ago. It's even worse now in that, how can I explain this? In the days of territory wrestling, if the babyface won the worst match that they'd ever seen, the people left happy. But if the heel won the greatest in-ring match of all time, they were pissed. So Ole had, even though things had gotten about halfway or not even to where they are now, Ole still thought that people would be happy if you could blame the heel for something bad or give the babyface credit for something good. It didn't matter, whatever the fucking DQ and blah, blah, blah. I've been accused of doing these things. I figure if it's a real good finish, you can get away with it, no matter what it is. If it's a bad finish, like that was, you can't get away with it, no matter what it is. That was a bad finish.
What's the outfit? What kind of getup is George in here?
Jorge
Yes.
Gonzalez. He was a nice man. And
Yeah.
it was not his fault. He was not cut out for this. I remember I was walking through CNN Center on the way to the office with Jim Ross. And he said, look, he said, there's our new giant. And I looked over and there was a guy sitting in one of the seats at the lobby of the Omni Hotel. He was so tall when he was sitting in a normal chair, his knees were up over his head. And he looked like $1 million. And he'd played basketball in Argentina, but he was not by any stretch of the imagination athletic enough to be a wrestler. He could have got by with it because of his size, but there was the language barrier. He had never seen wrestling before. He totally didn't get it. He was a nice man, but it was another investment they made that just did not pan out. He was legitimately 7'7", or close enough to where you didn't really want to argue with it. And he was, he was great. He was a great guy. Just, oh God, it hurt the fans' feelings to just watch him walk. You can tell when a guy don't know what he's doing when he walks.
dressed as a space age samurai too.
Yeah, well, it's because they had a fucking creative department that, wow, this would be a nice looking outfit. And but they gained a giant, but guess who they lost? The Road Warriors. Because the Road Warriors, where is it? I know it off the top of my head, but I'll prove it. The Road Warriors were making $10,400 a week each, and Paul Ellering was making $5,000 a week. And that was a holdover from the contracts from Crockett when they were the biggest tag team box office attraction in the business, and they were drawing that money. And there was two things about the Warriors that people never got. Number one, they always tried to match them with like Warlord and Barbarian or some team that was going to be physically, so it was like the irresistible force and immovable object, which
similar.
Didn't work because the only way the Road Warriors, and I love Hawk and Animal, I'm not knocking them, they were huge draws and this was the key to them drawing, and I'm about to put them over. They had to be against heels that had so much heat that you wanted to see those heels killed. Whether it be the Midnight Express thrown off the scaffold, or whether it be the Horsemen like Tully and Arn or Flair, whatever combination of the Horsemen, that could take bumps for them and make them look like they were unbeatable. And then they would sell in the context of the match, but then they would go over and triumph in the end. When you put them with two guys that were just as big and just as strong, it was just this, and it didn't fucking work. Yeah. And secondly, at this point, Herd felt they were making way too much money, and to be quite honest, for the shape the business was in, The Rock could not have drawn for this fucking company. But they wanted to get away from Herd. And the contract negotiations, well, it didn't go anywhere because Herd wasn't going to anywhere near that amount of money, and I don't think they wanted to stay even if they'd got the same amount of money. So they finished up on May 25th was their last day, I believe, or 26th. But we worked with them in Memphis on May 24th and St. Louis on May 25th. And here's once again how fucked up Herd was in the head. They come in Memphis, and Hawk and Animal both said, Bobby and Stan and me, said, you guys are from here. Why the fuck are we beating you? We're leaving. You guys are from here. We'll put you over. Okay. And I mean, there was interference, and there was racket, and there was chaos and everything, but that 1, 2, 3 in the middle of the ring, I think the Midnight Express are the only team that ever beat them by pinfall in their NWA run. Find me another instance of that, right? But they did it voluntarily to return the favor to us for what we'd done for them in our hometown of Memphis. And the next night we go to St. Louis. Of course, it wasn't on TV and everything. It had pay-per-view, been a different story. Next night we go to St. Louis. Herd had found out that they switched the finish, and the team that was leaving put the team that was staying over. He got hot, and he demanded that they win. Yes, motherfucker. So Hawk and Animal got together, and they had negotiated the deal for Paul also, because he was part of the team. So they got together and said, all right, motherfucker, we will win, but we're not going to beat the Midnight Express. So they did a finish where even though me and Paul were just the managers out on the floor at ringside, they jerked me in and Paul pinned me. Because they refused, the Road Warriors, and I give them all the credit in the world, the Road Warriors refused to win a match for the only time in history.
Wow.
But that's how fucking far off Herd was in his fucking head. And then they were, so we got El Gigante and lost the Road Warriors. So now the talent that is over, he's denied the people Tully Blanchard. He's marginalized the fucking Horsemen. He's run off the Road Warriors. But we're getting El Gigante and JYD and things.
How did Paul come to return here in 1990?
I don't really. It was as a matter of fact, it was on the Louisville Slugger, on syndication. I interviewed Teddy Long and Mark and Paulie. I don't remember how the deal was made for him to come back. I was off the committee by that point. I don't remember where Paul had been.
Did you guys get along?
Yeah, you see, we actually, the boys thought we hated each other long before we actually did. And since we've covered this, or maybe we didn't in the previous, because actually it was 88, but Paulie and Dennis Conrad and Randy Rose would not have come to the NWA to begin with if it hadn't been for me and Bobby and Stan begging Dusty to bring them in. because he had switched us babyface and then we lost Tully and Arn. They went to the WWF, September of '88, put the World Tag titles on us. Then he switched to Road Warriors heel, and they beat us for the belts and did the double turn kind of thing in New Orleans. But we had nobody to work with. We'd been making these huge checks against Tully and Arn and drawing these tremendous houses, 140 grand in Richmond, whatever the fuck, and all of a sudden we got nobody.
Yeah.
So I had seen that Paul E. was with Randy and Dennis in the AWA, and I came up with the idea where he came out on TV, surprise, hit me with the phone, I get the juice, the angle, right? Which, of course, got butchered that was Dusty's, last month as Booker. And then Jimmy Crockett took over and didn't like fucking Randy Rose. Yeah. And then George Scott came in and didn't like us.
We did that in the '89. Yeah.
Yeah. So, so that had been all fucked up. But basically, no. I liked the idea of having Paul Lee to work against. And when he came back here, I didn't have anything against him being there because fuck, it's not like he's going to take a spot away from me. I barely had a fucking spot. All they were doing at that point, the Midnight were barely working. When Ole marginalized him even further because he wasn't going to die on that hill, as JR would say, against Herd. So he just left the Midnight Express off most of the time or had him do jobs on TV. And I was just doing commentary. So there was no problem with me and Paul. The legitimate problem, we worked the boys a lot. They thought there had to be animosity and there had to be hatred going back to that first angle. And we kept it kind of that way because if they believed it, then the people would believe it. But there was never animosity between me and Paul until ECW and Smoky Mountain when he screwed me on the Gangstas. But that's a whole different story for another day.
What do you think about his pairing with Mark?
I think it was probably one of the best things they could have done with Mark at the time because you put that guy, he could get anybody over with his promo, and at the same time, he probably imparted a little bit of psychology. As long as Mark was there, he wasn't going to be there too long before Vince saw talent and stole him and made him the greatest star in the history of wrestling.